A bunch of engineers in one room. How do we fix the speaker?
No idea. No idea.
Look for the amp flip switch.
Yeah. Have you tried turning it on and off again?
Pull the power out the wall.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Audiomovers podcast. I am your host, Mixed by Jocelyn, and as always, we've got Matt from Audiomovers.
How you doing?
And we have a very special co-host today, Mirik from Abbey Road. How's it going?
Good, thank you.
And our guests today, we have Brion and Kevin, the authors of the legendary book, Recording The Beatles. How's it going, bro?
Thank you. Good. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Amazing. Just to get started for everyone watching, because we record with loads of different people from all over the industry, I'd love it if you guys would each give a little bit of background to your careers and how you got started in the industry.
I'm Brion Kehew from Los Angeles. I would like to say that I have too many jobs to count, but they're all in music. And mixing is my favorite thing to do, so I get to do mixing, mostly for Warner Brothers. And then sometimes we get to write books together. Kevin's my book writing co-author. And then other times I'll even go on tour. I work with The Who a lot.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And yourself?
I'm originally from Texas, but have moved to LA and just grew up in a house where my dad was always recording. So I started recording at a young age. Just do production and songwriting stuff, do a lot of writing work, do a lot of graphic design work, and I kind of juggle a lot of balls.
He's very talented.
Yeah.
What was your dad recording?
He's just very singer-songwriter stuff. You know, it was the 70s. So I just grew up watching him like build and write songs from scratch. It was a very, good crash course in how you start with nothing and build a song up on 4-track. So that was my, foundational learning experience.
Like a cassette 4-track?
No, reel to reel.
Oh, reel for reel.
Yeah, that's what I
nice.
started
Good.
recording on back in the 80s. Was just like punching in and doing overdubs on reel to reel. So
Playing with the vari-speed and...
a little bit, but really just teaches you how to, work with economy. Because you have to plan things in advance. And
How old are you, Kevin?
I'm 50.
50.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't look 50. I was going to say, because I'm looking at you and I'm like,
He always gets
you look
that.
more similar to my age, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't, just totally different era. You know what I mean?
I'm glad you said that because I thought the same thing. It's like, this isn't the guy.
Yeah,
Vegan diet, right?
I remember the 70s really well. Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, because you're telling me the story, and I'm like, I didn't get any exposure to that growing up and like starting recording.
Yeah.
It was just
With
straight
tape?
into Cubase basically.
Course,
Yeah.
So I was like a bit spun, and obviously 50 maybe makes more sense. That's bad. Looking very good for 50.
Hey,
I'd
thanks,
say.
man.
It's interesting generationally how people grow up with different technologies kind of shapes the way they work as well, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's going to be a recurring topic of today's episode, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because obviously you guys know so much about how the Beatles recorded their music, and we're going to save it a little bit later. But before we get into that, I'd love to know how you guys...
Can I cut across you
sure.
just because I hate to break the flow, but just because we only just got started rolling. This ATC behind me is really hissing and
It
crackling. I don't know if you're getting that, Rufus, if it's... I don't know why the hell...
Oh, it is, isn't it?
It is kind of talking to us.
Not coming through to me.
But, and
Do
also,
you mind
what the
just
hell is
flipping the amps, please,
Or
sir?
just, yeah,
No.
or even the cut on the...
We're getting an exclusive, a bunch of
tech talk.
bunch of engineers in one room. How do we fix the speaker?
No idea. No idea.
Look for the amp flip switch.
Have you tried turning it on and off again?
Pull the power out the wall.
Amps,
That's it, yeah. Yeah, when you hear the pop, you know you did it right.
Yeah.
When the tweeter flies across the room.
So,
Can we get another ATC and then put them out of phase with each other? And then we'll cancel it out.
That's brilliant. Are we good? No, yeah, it's cool. It's good.
Nice.
Cool.
So,
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. As I was saying, I think it's funny content, isn't it?
Yeah.
As I was saying, like, how did you guys meet and
yeah.
start working together?
The connection came about in this building. We didn't meet in this building, but Kevin and I were working on the same project independently. And the idea was to write a book about how the Beatles made records.
Yeah, and I had started writing it, back in the 90s in Texas. He was writing it in LA back in the 90s, but we didn't know each other were working on the same project. And eventually we started trying to interview the same people, and that's when we were made aware of each other. And at first it's like,
Kevin had met this...
someone else is doing my thing. I don't know about that.
There's some names from that world that you know, Jeff Emmerich or George Martin, people all over the world do, but we were looking for people in that world who were in the rooms with them. But there's this great guy named Brion Gibson, still a great friend of ours to this day. Kevin had met him first, and he's the wealth of knowledge. He was a boffin working here for 64 onward, basically.
Yeah.
Through the 80s and into the 90s almost. And then he really had a great memory, a great connection to everybody we wanted to know. Kevin had met him first, and then I met him here in the canteen. We were talking, he goes, there's someone else working on a book like yours. I went, oh no.
Yeah, I remember I got a phone call from Brion Gibson going, I just had this other American guy interview me. He's asking the same questions you are. I think you guys need to talk. And at first we were kind of like circling each other. But then we got on the phone, and like literally within 30 seconds, it was like, oh, this is, there's no other human on the planet that is geeked out about this stuff as I am. Like we're like, and what about the brown speakers in Studio 3? Like, I know, what are they? There's that kind of, we just instantly hit it off because we were just obsessing about the same details.
And it's a great life lesson because Kevin probably had the same thought I did. I'll make this great book for myself, for himself.
Yeah.
That not to get famous, but just I get to create something special that the world needs or wants to have.
Yeah.
And then you have to give up your ego. It's not that hard to let's share it. And I remember talking to Kevin saying, what if I know 99% and you know 1%? Or you know 99% and I know 1%? Somewhere in the middle there, we have a percentage, but putting it together makes a better book.
Cool.
And it makes us both look good. So giving up the ego was very important, and sharing. I mean, look at Paul McCartney and John Lennon. They both became greater because of working together.
Yeah. But and one of the things that when because we eventually pulled our resources, like, okay, I'm giving you my research, you're giving me yours. And when you put two independent researchers, pile of research together, and you've both independently found the same thing, that's like, it's pretty good corroboration that you're on the right track.
It's fate, really, how it's all come together then, and like the collaboration. Obviously, the book means so much to so many people, like even just fans of the Beatles, and then obviously engineers alike. You working together on it and removing the ego is what's obviously made it totally possible just to create the perfect book. Well, as for if we say perfect, but yeah,
I know you're working on V2 right now.
Yeah,
But I guess just being able to riff off of each other as well, right, and sense check each other. Working alone is a completely different experience to collaborating with someone.
Because you can start down a trail and think you're on the right path, but having a partner to look over and go, oh no, but remember that document we found over here? Okay. So you have someone to pull you back if you start down trails that aren't right, and just lead you. You reinforce each other.
Yeah, because there's so many bits of a jigsaw puzzle to put together. It's crazy, right? I mean, the depth of that book and the detail, and you're dealing with, well, let's face it, Beatles fans here, right? And they don't let you off on anything, right? You got to get it all spot on.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
Time-wise too, Kevin had been working for years. I'd been working for many years before we even met each other, and from that point on, it was 7 or 8 more years to collaborate to create the book. Now, again, if somebody had tried to do that on their own, it not only would not be as good, but you could not share the work, all the effort. I think we'd even finished writing it a year before the book came out. Kevin's a brilliant graphic designer and laid out the book and did the graphics and all these cool diagrams and things. Licensing photos, putting in the things into the book. We'd finished writing it a year before it came out, and then a year just on the layout to make it as great as possible. And then we also wanted, like most people do, will a book company put this out? And they were all interested, but they said, oh, it can't be bigger than this, and it can't be more than $35, and you shouldn't have a lot of Beatles pictures in it because they cost too much money. We said,
you can't have color.
That's not what we wanted. That's not what we built. So we became a book company, not knowing or having done it before.
Yeah.
Let's make a better book than they would make, the big companies, because they're interested in saving money. We're interested in making a great book.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the size there. Was there any sort of reasoning to the size of the book and the case that it comes in?
To the dimensions of it? Yeah, I mean, we realized that square size, not only does it reference like an LP cover, but it also references like the tape boxes, it's like, this reel of studio tape. And then we're like, oh, wait, we could make the case of it look like one of those tape boxes. And we were so excited. We were like, yeah, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, I had the opportunity, like, knowing that we were going to have you guys on today, I had the opportunity to speak to my tutor who I haven't spoken to in like 10 years. He's a mega fan of the book, a mega fan of the Beatles, and he was, going on about you have to mention the sizing and all this stuff. And so that was brilliant.
Well, I remember a story you told me. I don't know if you remember this, but we had just gotten the books in from the printer, and I'd sent a couple of copies to Brion, and he had one of those in the tape box in the seat of his car, and he'd run in to do something. He came out and looked in the car, and for a second he thought, "Oh no, I left a reel of tape sitting in the car in the hot sun. Oh no!" And I know it's our book. It's not tape, but it's pretty convincing in the box.
It is.
Saw that.
It's such a classic design as well. Those old Emmy tape boxes look fantastic.
Love the graphics
from the 50s through to the 70s. They just got a certain sort of look and feel to them.
They do.
Yeah.
There was a space on the back of the boxes where you'd write in song titles and things like that. Kevin had the great idea to have Ken Scott, one of the Beatles' main engineers, write in the chapter titles on the back in his handwriting, which is on some of the Beatles tapes. So it all ties together. It's kind of, effort meets congruity of putting things together. But even just putting the book we cared about in a box to make it feel more special, it does. A book off the shelf is fine. Hardcover seems nicer than softcover. Putting it in a cardboard case, we usually put in postcards and some posters. They're not so difficult, but it makes you feel special when you open it.
It's a very special
feeling. It enhances the whole experience.
And there was a pull-out poster of the red desk, right?
Yeah.
The red 51.
But obviously, Apple computers have learned this. When you get packaging from them, it's like, oh, I want to keep the box. And now you want and so they're enhancing your enjoyment before you even pull out the new iPhone.
You guys were just before unboxing was a thing, right? So hopefully for the next version there'll be unboxing videos.
They definitely will be.
Yeah.
We have some ideas, and I won't tell you what
they are. No, we're not.
Are we allowed to talk about the book that's hopefully about the George Martin book and things like that? Are you approaching that kind of in the same way? Is that going to, in terms of the presentation and all of that?
We've spent many years doing a book. We were here doing our annual lectures, and Giles Martin took us to his room and asked us to collaborate on a project. He'd had this idea for years that his father's orchestra scores were important, and they should be seen by people. Almost none of them have been, actually.
Yeah, so what George would do is he'd handwrite the score for the Beatles. Like, so yesterday, he handwrote in pencil all those pages, took those pages into the studio, they recorded it, and then he took the pages home as like a souvenir. And he just stowed it away. For him, it was a keepsake. And then over the years, this pile grew. And so Giles knew those were there, and he's like, I think they shouldn't be just hidden away. It would be good for people to be able to see those. So what we've been doing for several years is figuring out the best way to present those. And originally, I think we thought, it'd be a pretty simple book. You present the score with a little bit of text. Then what happened is we started going through the scores, and then we started to realize, oh wait, they don't always perfectly match the recording. There are things that George had originally written in here which got changed. And so you start looking through it and you realize there are a whole lot of interesting alternate timeline versions of ideas within these scores that we need to explain to people, which means, we need to have a more significant text component to this. And then so we set out on years of writing and digging through and literally going through measure by measure and stuff. So
certainly, if any people are fans of George Martin, we've spent many, many hours of our lives appreciating his work, not just as music fans and things, but studying the details and appreciating how much he brought to their table to make them beyond, the Beatles with guitars on a stage, long hair and suits and things. But when we think of the trumpets, we think of the cellos, we think of the backwards tape, we think of the loops and things. This is George Martin's assistance to create a three-dimensional band that was beyond a band on the stage. And of course, they were pushing and pulling too, and they worked with other engineers and creative people. But we were fans of George. Then we get into this project and orchestral work, arranging. We're familiar with it and things like that. But looking behind the scenes, sometimes things get worse. You say a movie set and it's not really real and the house is not there. But when you see George's work, it actually holds up to high scrutiny, and it makes you appreciate it so much better. Like yesterday, one of the simplest ones and earliest ones in the book. It's a simple string quartet, nothing difficult about it, but it couldn't be more simple and still be so good.
Yeah.
But it's really, you couldn't write less almost. He never got it busy. And his economy always supported what people did. He never went for the frilly, let's show off my arrangements.
Yeah.
He's always doing these incredible things. And then when we get to Strawberry Fields, which we're all used to, he's got 2 cellos, a string bass, and 4 trumpets. That's the arrangement for a rock song. That's a weird arrangement no matter what. There's no violins, there's no other horns. And it's brilliant, but we're so used to it until we step back and look at the score and understand how they did it. So we became in as great George Martin fans, and now having the book come together, we became much deeper. And all the people that worked with us, conductors and arrangers, people that do major motion pictures, have helped us with the orchestral side. And they're like, wow, I had no idea George Martin was this great.
Was there anything you discovered during that process that will feed into the next version of Recording the Beatles? Was it a continuous learning experience, right?
This is the thing. His scores are like a primary resource for information that you couldn't get from any other source. You couldn't get it from the multi-track tapes. You couldn't get it from session documentation. There were things hidden in there that we never anticipated.
Like notes and stuff? Or
notes or places where you can see that here's what he originally wanted to do, but because of constraints of the tape, he was forced to in that last second, like, completely change his vision. Or you could see how what we got really into was if you look closely enough, you can see his erasures. And if you treat the scans the proper way, we would filter the scans, we could bring out all of his erased notes.
It's getting forensic.
Wow. It was very forensic. But then you can see, look what he originally did here. Originally, he had the violins going up here. In the end, he erased it, decided not to do that. But the alternate timeline version is the violins went up here, and they had a melody part. And so we found all of these. You get into George Martin's creative mindset because you can follow his path he took, and then he backed up, and then he moved forward, and took another little fork in the road, and then backed up, and we didn't know that was going to be there.
I mean, there's some quite, there's famous stories about certain techniques and certain record. Were there things that you found that changed the established story, or it didn't go down like that? Actually,
some of it we're saving for the book. We can't tell you what they are.
Yeah,
some of the most known pieces were like, oh wow, this is not the story that we've all heard 100 times. The story they tell is an easy story to explain what they did in one sentence, but the reality of the complexity of it or the challenges of it is revealed as soon as you open the pages. This is not what they told us.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And there's times when we just see an entire piece of a song where, he had the orchestra playing all the way through there, and he goes, no, he just dropped it out. Like 32 measures of orchestra. Yeah. We're not going to use that. Or maybe it was recorded and in the mix it was taken out, but there's a whole score piece that I've never heard that part. It doesn't exist on the final mix. So.
But again, that shows his ego wasn't involved, because he wrote and recorded a whole piece and then went, maybe we don't need it in there. And a lot of people would be like, no, I wrote this, we recorded it, it's going in. So he was just
didn't want it to become a distraction.
He was very good at self-editing and pulling himself out of the picture if it didn't serve the song.
We keep mentioning the B word. The Beatles is a focus for a lot of us, and in Abbey Road world that often happens. But the original concept was to put just the Beatles scores in a book and do that. But when we started looking at, George has a multi-decade career, and the Beatles is 8 years of that. And even the string parts and arrangements are a portion of that.
Yeah.
So, of course, the Beatles are important. The Beatles are massively important and a focus of everything. But to make the book a little more three-dimensional, a little more respectful to him, we decided to include other pieces for other groups, film score work he did, famous stuff in most cases, things you would know, but things some people don't know. We discovered some great pieces he wrote, and we put them in alongside the others.
Great. What about that and the comedy records as well?
Did you go into specifically. And in fact, what's interesting is some of the scores exist and some of them don't. Some song we were looking for, we couldn't find it. Some of the James Bond pieces, we love that score. But we have some others. And so as we came into it, we thought, can this book be better than that? How could it be better? Well, let's take the piece and then present it. But then we've had people from around the world look at it and say, do you know there's a French sixth in here? And the cello is the upside-down version of it. I never knew that. We combined all of what they wrote into an analysis of each piece. So you have Yesterday, 4 pages, I think. But we have 6 pages about it. afterwards, showing you the example. But notice the cello, and this is Paul McCartney's part that George said he wished he wrote, is the cello line and so forth. And we go into that, showing you very clearly, even if you don't read music, it's an easy book to get through. Because you can say, oh, the cello goes up, the cello goes down. You don't need to know the notes, you don't need to know all the terms, but we show people the basics, and then we said, could it even be better? And then we decided, let's come back here to Abbey Road and re-record some of those pieces without the drums on top, without the singing, so you can hear in stereo, because a lot of, for example, Beatles are in mono in those days, 1 of 4 tracks maybe. So we have stereo versions of I Am the Walrus and things like that with multi-tracks. Multiple tracks will come with the book. The cello mic, the room mic, the viola mic, the clarinet mic, and then you can do your own mixes, or you can listen.
Oh wow, amazing!
Yeah. It's never been done, as far as we know.
What amazing education for also young up and coming composers as well, right?
Hopefully,
like a great resource to learn about composition from a pop point of view.
I was going to say, because for me and my generation, obviously, we've had limitless recording capability, basically. We've never been constrained to having 4 tracks or whatever, and it seems like a lot of the magic from these songs comes from maybe having those constraints. Would you say that was true?
I think so.
Now think also the world when George grew up, who could play with an orchestra? Well, the most high level people, even you work with a university or a school orchestra, but now we have these incredible libraries and things, and people are scoring independent videos of their own pop song with live. Spitfire has actually
guilty.
It's true.
Some of them pretty good.
Abbey Road strings, and you could sit at home with this I Am the Walrus and then learn the parts and maybe do your own piece. And what if I change it? What if I do that with cellos and this type? And when it says Arco on the string score, oh, I have an Arco set of cellos in my library, and you learn how they work. So ideally, as a teaching tool, when we were at George's house, and we've told him it would be really cool to make this work for people who don't speak written music as like the gateway drug.
Yeah.
Come into it without fear. It's yesterday. It's only 4 lines. It's so easy. Oh, I see that goes down. And some people, oh, that's a C, and that's an E and a G. Okay, I can follow that.
Okay, so the world of the population of the world composers is going to go up after the release of this book, right?
But I hope some good ones in there, because they're learning from the master. And so George's book will be a lot of interesting things. Should be done this year. It's been many years in the making, and it looks really strong at this point.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah.
You mentioned almost like a multiverse of different variations of the song that never came around, sometimes from recording constraints and just changes in the song.
Yeah.
And then you also say that you're going to have this opportunity to have your own mix. Are you going to put any of those different versions in the book?
We've thought about it. We didn't record those alternate lines in the studio, but there might be some way to include some of those alternate ideas. We're trying to figure out something, but I
think the fans would. That's a massive thing, to be able to hear what could have been and then what was.
We live in the modern world where the book doesn't just come out and be done. We could do podcasts, we could do YouTube videos, we could do all kinds of things where we can go further into our own work. There are some pieces we took out of the book for whatever reason. Maybe we can show that then. It's different from the book, but it introduces you to what the book is doing. And here's an outtake from a movie, the director's cut. This is one that didn't make it, but you should probably see it.
Yeah, and also like Brian said, people will get the book and they will go through and create those alternate parts.
Of course.
They kind of give it to the world.
It's kind of, it'll be fun for people to do that, I think, to dig through. And people, we found a lot in there, but I'm sure there's also other little, oh, look, he went up here when he didn't do that on the album. People might find things that we missed. There's just so many, it's thousands and thousands of measures.
Because that's quite it's a thing online where you can find alternate versions of Beatles records and stuff like that, and people really fan over those recordings.
Arguments for days about which bass is it, which guitar was it.
I mean, it's a bit of a leap, but a lot of the work that you did on records like Fleetwood Mac and stuff like that, and a lot of that stuff for Warner Brothers, where you were finding tapes, analog tapes and digital tapes that had never been, alternative takes and things like that. I mean,
we all appreciate a classic record, whatever it is, Pink Floyd or Pink or something. They're all cool. And then if you've heard those 12 songs for a decade or 10 decades, you get a little tired of it, as much as you may love it, just to hear a fresh version of it, like these Beatles box sets that come out with wonderful new versions. They may not be superior to the one that came out, but it's great to have a refreshing new version of it. And so, again, that job of that a few people around the world have it. It's often done here at Abbey Road, where I get to get old tapes and you listen to Fleetwood Mac or Alice Cooper or Black Sabbath and say, what have we not heard before? And you're going through those tapes and say, okay, good, there's an extra guitar. And we all wish we could do that with the Beatles, but they've had a good run of releasing good quality outtakes from almost every album coming at this point. And it's great. It may not be as important and world changing, but those of us that care want more of the same thing. And that's the best way to get it authentic.
I feel like it doesn't happen as much in modern recording, because there's a few situations, like there was that famous Kanye album where he changed it like a couple of days after he released it and things like that, and now people are obsessed with that original version that's no longer available. But because of the way that we record now and how like perfect we can be with it, those other versions tend to just get lost or deleted. It's all digital.
That's right. Tapes better than hard drives in that regard.
There's certainly limitations. If even a band like Fleetwood Mac that may have recorded a song on 12 reels of tape, that one's incomplete, that one's good, this one has no vocal. It makes it easier to make the choices. But if you've got hard drive upon hard drive of revisions and 32 lead vocals, which comp made the lead vocal?
How do you?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, this is it. I mean, you talked about the limitation of the gear earlier on. It's almost like you were forced to make choices back then, right? Whereas now, you can have like 30 takes of a vocal and keep them all, just in case there's a nugget of greatness in one of those takes, right?
Maybe it, the limitlessness we have now when it comes to recording is almost actually constraining us a little bit and making us like less free with it.
It's because there's that. I mean, I'd love to know what you guys think, but that thing of, I think you spoke about, there was some Fleetwood Mac records and you were talking about we didn't retune the vocals and things like that, and that's one of those things where now on modern records to just not, I remember I was listening to a pop song and it was from like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and there was some bum notes in there, and I was like, this is amazing, because this would just never happen now. This would have been,
it's too perfect,
precision,
almost.
One of the things that appeals to humans and about someone exceptional, Michael Jackson, John Bonham, Jaco Pastorius, Joni Mitchell, is their differences from everybody else. Joni Mitchell will never do opera. She could never outsing Freddie Mercury, for example. But her qualities are unique to her, and yet people have done it, where they take John Bonham's amazing drum track that we all revere and they've straightened it out, and it sounds like everybody else.
Put it on the grid.
Your individual choices of pitch, maybe a limitation of a singer. We were listening to one the other day that was always flat. That's the sound. He sold millions of records, but there would be no Bob Dylan, there would be no Neil Young, Brian Ferry, all these people that are not necessarily strong singers that never win a talent competition or anything, but they're legendary because of how they deliver, and it's because of what could be a flaw can also be character. And if you take character out, it's cookie cutter, it's generic.
I think that's the thing. The character is being massaged out of everyone's vocals now, because we can. And I don't know. And you also, with the limitless choices, you get into analysis paralysis a lot, where it's just so you can delay your choices, and you have infinite possibilities. And I think what you were saying is like having to commit, get it down in the moment. You can't go back.
That's it, commit, right? I mean, they would bounce, wouldn't they? The Beatles, for example, would bounce from one 4-track to one track and another 4-track, and that would give them 3 more tracks to layer on. Now, they do that like maybe 3 or 4 times. When you come to the final mix, the snare drum's too quiet. There's nothing you can do about it.
Right?
So you're making. I guess they were forced to make decisions there and then. And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but it must have been a different psychology. In the studio to what you have now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of the opposite of option paralysis, but they didn't have more than maybe 8 microphone choices. They had 2 kinds of EQ, one on the desk and one outside. 2 compressor options for bass, drums, room, whatever they wanted. And they made Beatles records. Not that they sound better kick drum wise or anything, but they made records that were so good with a few choices that basically anybody's home studio has as many choices, good ones too, as the Beatles had, why aren't you making records as good as the Beatles? The problem is not how many tracks, or did you get too close to the mic, or is it even tuned? It's more about the content and the raw material. Anyone can write the world's greatest book tomorrow. You could literally sit down and do it, or sit on a couch with a guitar. You could write a much better song. There's nothing stopping you from writing a better song. And when that song comes out so good, you can record it anyway, with drum loops, with orchestra samples, with tuned vocals. But the song being so good would be the most important part. And so there is nothing stopping me from going home with a keyboard and writing a brilliant song, except my lack of... But you could think that way, saying it's not about having the right digital audio converter and clock to make a great record. It's literally the material that's most important.
It's not just in the music industry. Well, I remember when I worked on a film with Alan Parker, and he was telling me about the final dub for Midnight Express, right? And he said things have got so much more complicated now. He said back then we had 3 faders, mono sound effects, mono dialogue, and mono music, and you had 2 options, more or less.
Yes, right.
And that was the dub of the film that went out to the cinemas. It's, I don't know, different world now.
Stanley Kubrick, probably the greatest filmmaker, one of the top 5 of all time, and he does not have bad films, but he didn't do stereo until the very end. I think he'd passed on, and they decided to do some stereo, but he refused to have stereo mixes of his films.
Wow.
And yet the music is so important, the sound of it, but even The Shining is in mono.
Wow.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow. So that actually does link back to the Beatles, right? Because am I right in saying that the original mono mixes are considered to be the superior mixes, if you like, because that's what they spent their time on, because stereo at the time was just the new format and no one really paid that much attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, the Beatles they personally were only really concerned with the mono mixes. I mean, maybe around the White Album they started paying some attention to the stereo mixes, but before that, mono was the currency of pop. It's what was heard on the radio, and people's, their little record players at home, they were listening to mono. So that's what they were focused on. Stereo was a novelty. Over here in England, it certainly was.
I mean, it's interesting because we kind of got a thing now with Dolby Atmos, right? Because we've got these extra speakers. It's like, where do I put stuff? And it must have been the same then. It's like, okay, I've got 2 speakers now. What do I do? And they put the vocals on one side and the drums in the other, and like, right, that's it, stereo, done.
I was gonna say,
they were finding their feet, I suppose.
We'll be having this same conversation about stereo and Dolby in like 30, 40 years time. Do you think we'll be having that same conversation? Like, they actually only really cared about the stereo mix.
I think well, they sort of are. They're kind of having the that decision to put Ringo all in the left channel and things like that. There are people having that conversation about Atmos because they're talking about putting the vocals in the center channel and stuff like that. It's just because it's happening so much quicker now. So they're kind of going like, okay, more music's coming out, so it's kind of being accelerated. Those conversations and stuff.
But I'll never forget the day that Kevin wrote to me and said, I just figured something out, and it's so obvious and so dumb, and yet no one has figured it out. In the stereo recordings, or the mixes of the Beatles, what you say, he said the drums are almost always on the left, the bass is almost always on the left, the guitars are almost on the right, because the desk was set up for stereo classical. So channel 1 was hardwired left, which was where they recorded mono, drums, and bass. Channel 2 was hardwired right for your orchestra, 2 microphones out. And so it was hardwired. You could pan 3 and 4, but there's no need to pan 1. It's going to be on the left for opera, and right is the stereo pair. There was no panning on 1 and 2. So when they said, we need to do a stereo mix now. Okay, well, drums are on 1 and 2. And we'll put the vocals somewhere else, maybe the tambourine and the Hammond organ somewhere. And 95 or 6% of the time, the drums were on one side and the guitars were on the other.
So again, most people thinking, it's a creative decision, but it's totally not.
More limitations.
It's limitations again of the equipment.
A constraint of the desk, and the fact that they were bound by, like, EMI had some pretty firm technical, guidelines they had to follow back then, and those desks were made for stereo classical music, and no, we're not. You have to just deal with the
But a lot of people that appreciate the stereo mixes would say that adds to the character of the song, and like,
to me it does.
It's so unique. And like, especially when you compare it to a modern record now, where the kick is coming out of the center whether you like it or not. And it's totally different. And if we're panning guitars, we've always got to have a left and a right. So
symmetry.
It's
but
crazy.
it's funny because if you pan your drums all the way left now, people go, "Oh, like the Beatles," and you're like, "Well, yeah, they didn't want to do that." But yeah, you're
like
right.
the guy who was at the desk.
He didn't want to do it either. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So that would have been the red desks, right?
Yeah.
That red 37 or the red 51?
Yeah.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. And the red 37 that was in Studio One had actually been modified, so you did have some panning control. And if you listen to any stereo mixes that were done in Studio One, you can see that they were moving things more to the center and to more logical places because they had that capability, but only on that desk.
But it's so simple. If drums were on track 1 with bass, they could have patched that into input 3, right? And pushed input 3 into track 1. If you had a guitar on 3, for example, okay, let's just put it on 1 so it'll come out on the left. Let's put the drums up in the middle in this song. They didn't care that much.
Well, and they weren't allowed. You weren't allowed to run tape output 3 into desk input 1. It just wasn't done. You know.
Yeah, but I mean, they could have pushed it in creative, but they didn't care that much. Drums can be on one side. Great.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You say like they didn't care, because from doing, learning about it when I was at school, and because as I said, my tutor was a massive fan and is a huge fan of like learning. Oh, excuse me, that's my belly. Right. Learning about how they recorded it and stuff. It was always sort of it always came across to me that how creative they were as a band and how groundbreaking they were with their music. It almost forced the technology to grow as well. Would you say that sort of led into it, or maybe not so much?
Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. I mean, we had a great quote from somebody that said, we were talking to the engineers about, you're so creative, you're so ahead of the game doing this cool. They said, they basically put a gun to our head and said, you must make my vocals sound weird, different. And I said, your drums sounded great last week. That was the great drum sound. So now we want a not great drum sound.
Different.
We just
always
don't want to be the same.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, because I think one of the things that's really interesting or like really powerful about the book is, you started to talk about it earlier, is like, a lot of people know about George Martin, Jeff Emerick, Ken Scott, but actually there's a lot of unsung heroes, and there was a lot of people part of that process who had a huge, whether it be creative or technical, but they had an involvement in that. So it's like, those kind of stories. I mean, were there ones that you can remember being like, oh shit, this was the guy who, or...
Well, it's interesting you bring it up, because one of our favorite parts of the book was finding all these people, getting to know the names, not just those people, but the ones that people didn't know, like our friend Brion Gibson, who's a technician. He never recorded the Beatles so much, but he was in the room fixing things. Other people were tape ops, rewinding the tape and getting tea, but they had their stories. But Norman Smith did half of the Beatles records. He did the early period, and so it's considered to some people not as creative, but at the time it was groundbreaking. He had ideas. I want to capture them live. He and George Martin even thought they would record up at the Cavern to get what was happening about the Beatles. Okay, well, no, we'll do it down here, but we'll catch them live. Most people did, of course, but they didn't want to put reverb all over it. They didn't want tricks and tons of overdubs. And so if you listen to Twist and Shout, it's being mixed while it's recorded for the first take.
The raw recording.
Is there a better mix, though? The mix is perfect. He's never heard the song before, and the drums are in the right pocket. The bass could not be louder or quieter. The vocal is compressed just the right amount. He did the mix as they were performing it, and it's like, it's a perfect mix, too. So he's underrated in that way, that we see this older gentleman years above the Beatles, whereas Jeff Emerick, Ken Scott, etc. were of their age group in a way. But Norman looked a bit more older. But it turns out he was this really hip guy. So Norman Smith, who is doing Rubber Soul, which is the leap forward for the Beatles, really creative. And, doing backwards tapes with them and some cool things like that. So he went on to become a producer. And what does he do? The Pink Floyd, one of the most progressive groups. So Norman was not a fuddy-duddy, stick-in-the-mud person. The Beatles didn't want to even lose him. But he became a producer, and so therefore he goes out and finds this insanely psychedelic group, almost not commercial at all. And I think they've had some success.
Yeah, a little bit.
Didn't Norman also become a bit of an artist himself?
Hurricane Smith. He did. In the 70s, Hurricane Smith,
So there you go.
Wow. You were speaking about finding out all these characters that were a part of the Beatles story. Yeah. And on the phone yesterday to my tutor, he mentioned about a postcard that you put in the book.
Oh yeah.
And he described the man as someone that went on a very long holiday to Greece. on the Beatles.
On the Beatles.
Is that Magic Alex?
Is the George Martin?
He's telling George Martin, the producer, went during the White Album, went on a holiday, and sent a postcard back while he was on holiday to the group, to Ken Scott and the Beatle Boys. And he just said, having a lovely holiday, hope things are going well in the studio, and he just left them to it during that period. And they were at a point in their career where they could do that. They could get a lot of work done in his, without him there. But he came back and resumed the sessions and kind of took the lead back over. But yeah, that's the postcard he's talking about. We included a reproduction of it in the book.
Because it says, I found the perfect spot for a studio.
That's it. Yeah. And he did eventually go off and, create another studio.
Another cool part of that story was there was a young guy who had, a year or two before written him, said, would you take on an apprentice? And George goes, yeah. And then the guy never followed up, and his name was Chris Thomas. And then a year or so later he goes, oh, I should have followed up. Can I become your assistant? And George said, can I become your apprentice? And George said, okay. Chris Thomas had been a songwriter and musician in little local bands, but not a lot of success, and wanted to do that thing. So he came out and he hung out with George Martin and watched the Beatles working and so forth, and did some other sessions. And then suddenly George is gone, and then Chris Thomas shows up, and the Beatles say, what are you doing here? And then, I'm just here because George is not. He said, are you a producer then? I don't know. He didn't feel like he was producer of the Beatles, but they said, all right, we're going to do some takes. Tell us if we're good or not. So it's like, do another.
On the spot.
Do another. And telling the Beatles what to do. They became friends. He plays on the White Album a bit. He did assist them, whether he was producing or not. He can't really say, but he said. But Chris Thomas went on to do the Sex Pistols' first album, Roxy Music, Empty Glass by Pete Townsend, the first Pretenders record. Like some of the greatest records I've ever heard are Chris Thomas, who was given the step up by George Martin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you were putting the book together, was there any situations like roadblocks that got in the way that you were like, this is really making putting this together stressful?
A big part was a lot of the equipment had left the studio and had been just scattered around the earth, and there were some vital pieces that we needed to find. We knew they were important pieces, but it was like, where are they? We don't know where they are. The recording consoles were a big problem because the main consoles from Abbey Road were gone. We didn't know where we were going to find those, but one of the main pieces that we were needing to track down was the RS124 compressor. That gray, it was a modified Altec compressor that was used on every session. It was very important, and we didn't have access to them. They were we saw them in photos, but who knew where they were. And then one night, actually, when we first met you,
this is how we met, right?
We came here for a recording session.
John Brion and Fiona Apple.
Apple session back in 2001 or 2 or whatever year. I can't remember what year it was. You probably remember better than I was. And we had asked Lester about. It was something completely unrelated. Do you remember what it was?
We were looking for headphones?
It was something we were looking for, and Lester led us up to the cupboards to try to, and he opened the cupboard, and to find the thing he was looking for, he went, here, hold this, and it was an RS124, and he was like, here, hold this, and it was another RS124, and we're like, what? And they had the cords cut off, and so we asked him, hey, do you think you could get these running? Because and he did. He got it fired back up for the session.
Forget.
Remember us listening to it for the first time?
I think John Brion was playing the bass and he said, that's the sound.
That's the sound. They had been tucked away for decades at that point.
They were pretty noisy, but...
Yeah, they need some love and care.
They need some love, but...
amazing. It was a mystery only in that we knew it said Altec on the meter, and Altec has a very distinctive shaped VU meter on the front, if you will, for the compression amounts. But there were none of those in any Altec catalog. So we knew that they were bespoke, custom made, or at least modified.
Altered,
but we didn't know who, where, and how. We asked people, well, what was that thing? Oh, it was the Altec. But which model? We don't know.
There's a gray.
We plugged in.
It's a gray one.
But there are none like that, except at Abbey Road. They said, that's all we saw. They had 20, 30 of them. They were everywhere. Now they're nowhere. And then one day they're up in the cupboards here, decades later. No one had used them. And from that day, the discovery was how good they sounded, how distinctive they were. And I said that night, if you asked me to take home, do you want the Fairchild or do you want the Altec? I would like that Altec.
Yeah, the RS124. It's amazing.
And they ended up printing vocals through it, printing pianos through it. As soon as they heard it, they're like, we want more of that on this record. And it became a long cycle of like, discovering what it was called. Okay, RS124, it's a model number made it. It was heavily modified. It was not the things we'd bought some old Altecs. They didn't work or sound like that at all. And that's what Abbey Road had done in the day. They bought Altecs and said, they're not very good. Let's change them. And they designed their own circuit inside.
I think they changed everything, didn't they?
Yeah, they
Valves,
did.
Capacitors, resistors, everything.
And it was over a long period of time they were refining that and turning it into a different
seen
beast.
Notes where they've modified it over the years. And
do they still use the gear now? Like,
it's very
you can get. I mean, there's the Chandler.
Well, we've still got the three we found.
Well, okay.
Well, Lester pulled out of his cupboard. We've still got those three, and we've done recreations with Chandler. And we've done plugins with Waves. But I mean, before that though, right? They were a bit of a mythical beast.
Pretty much. We knew they'd existed, but like they were gone, and no one they didn't even pull them out for anthology because no one knew they were there.
And was that from was there a certain amount of forensics where you're like looking at photos? It sounds like there was a lot of that. Of like, what's that in the back of that? What's that?
That is an understatement.
We'll have the most massive collection, and not just the Beatles, the Shadows. Anybody that record Al McCogan, it doesn't matter. If there's a picture of them in the studio with an ashtray, we have it. Because you never know. And ashtrays, there's different ones we've actually spotted. Some are, they're literally, we track the stupidest things because you never know. The day George shaves his mustache up a little bit on the sides is the day this piece of equipment shows up in the studio. And we were some point tracking Beatles, styles and days, so we could see a photo that we didn't know when it was from, but something might show up that would, there's a newspaper or there's something, and we'd go look up what newspaper, what day was it.
We went pretty deep.
It's very forensic.
But we were putting so much, we're as much detail as we could from so many sources in the book, and then it's kind of like I knew we had finished the book when it got to the point where I was just asking the former engineers, like, okay, what color was the patch bay? Can you tell me?
You started sending me emails about the echo chamber.
I was like, okay, I think we're almost done. If I'm asking about the color of the patch bay,
was it the morning or the afternoon?
Exactly. We were.
I honestly can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, and we're asking people about 50, 60 years ago what kind of amp did Eric Clapton play on Wame, and it's like no one can remember those things because it really wasn't important. Once in a while, and we remembered because we were new to book writing, we'd not written anything before, and new to this kind of research, but people always remember their best day when they saved the day and they invented a great sound. Like the first question I asked when I met Ken Scott, who's now a great friend of ours, what's the piano sound on Birthday? That was the number one track that made me think of writing a book. What is that sound? It goes, what equipment would do that? And so years later, I meet Ken Scott, and I asked him, you made that record? He goes, that's me on the floor of the studio running the piano track through a Vox amplifier. The mid-range boost switch, I know about that. Great. And so it's a bit like a wah-wah with three-stepped positions, a bandpass filter. But he's doing it live, which makes you can do it not mechanically or electronically. He's doing with his hands. And so that was an answer that you could never get unless you asked that one person. But he remembers his best day in the studio, and most people remember their worst day in the studio when they really cocked it up. Of course we do. Sometimes you don't want to talk about it, but later on sometimes people say, I accidentally erased something, or I cut this and put it on the end of something, things like that. So.
Yeah, I did. I met Chuck Ainley, and he lit up because I was like, what's a horror story in the studio? And just like that, he was like, Van Morrison, first take, wasn't recording. I was like, okay, okay, camera rolling. That's
how to make an impression.
Do you guys have any moments like that? Like memorable moments in the studio where you're like, oh my God, I wish I could just disappear right now?
I did record a band. They had a song that started with a guitar riff, and there was no click track. It was a live take. And then I went in to punch in a new track of keyboard or another guitar or something, and I was like, where's the riff? And I hit stop when the drums came in. And the band wasn't paying attention, but the guitar was gone. The red light was on track 12. On my track sheet it said 11. Oops. And now it's gone. So I was like, let's just start it from the drum track, and I'll just put it, because the guitar comes back at that point. Okay. And I never rewound to the beginning, and they just did the overdubs. And then when they were gone, I flew it in from later in the song onto analog quarter-inch tape, and then punched it into the 100 tries to get it to line up until it was seamless, and then it went away. The problem was gone. But it was easily done now in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But back then, possibly not fixable, but it worked out.
Do they know? Do you ever know?
Now they do. Yeah.
One day over a drink. By the way, that's not how you play it.
I have an erased story. Matt Bellamy was recording a guitar solo in Studio 2, and I punched in at the wrong moment because he wanted to pick up.
Oh, God.
And so, when you just like punch in, you're just like, why am I not hearing anything being played? So you're just like, oh, stop. And I just said to the producer, I've erased the track, and the producer said to me, well, I'm not telling him, you go and tell him. I was just like, oh God, this is going to be really awkward. But he was fine about it, and we just did it again. But
that's the best.
You hear all these stories, right? You think people getting fired and all. I mean, it's bad etiquette. I got fired. It's bad etiquette.
From it once. That's where I learned, right, if it's not saved in 3 places, it ain't saved at all.
Okay.
Because we reopened the session, they come back, and they brought all of their friends and stuff to listen to it, and it was gone. And I was sitting there for 2 hours sweating, like, can I find this song? It's just disappeared off the face of the earth.
It's a bad feeling.
Yeah, honestly, I was in tears, I was like, and it was like the last time I was, and they were, it was a cool group, and I was like very excited to work with them, and never got the call back.
Character building.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely put some. It definitely toughened my skin a little bit.
Yeah. With all the different people you interview for the book, right? The engineers, the technical people, etc. We're talking about this thing about the memory's a funny thing, right? Were you ever getting contradictions?
Yeah, definitely.
And how do you deal with that? Like, who's right?
It was my idea to call it.
That's the nature of memory. Is you have 2 people, and we had this happen. We'd have 2 people. They were both on a session. The paperwork shows they were both there. They both tell conflicting stories about what happened, and this many years later, how do you figure out who's telling the truth? And a lot of times, what it is they're both telling the truth, but for different parts of the session. You have to figure that out. One of the weird things is that we ran into, which is kind of awkward, is there'd be guys that would tell you a story, a memory they had of a session, and it may be a story they've told several times, and the memory's pretty firm in their brain. But then you find a document written in their handwriting from the day of the session that shows something else happened. And it's kind of awkward going, okay, now you've told me this, but what about this? And you can see them looking at it, and you can see their brain trying to make sense of what they think happened, but what they see, the proof of what their younger self wrote. And there's a moment where it's just like, oh no, can I trust my memory? You can see them struggling
it's
with
not
that.
criticism, is it?
No, it's not.
Because I you said this. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. I can't remember what happened last week sometimes. So it happened. I mean, talking about 30, 40 years.
Yeah, and your memory has a way of like filling in the gaps.
That's it.
You know what I mean? And then that's where the problem comes in.
That's it. And you fill in the gaps so many times, and then you forget, or you sometimes you simplify a story over time to make it easier to tell, and then all you remember is the simplified story and not the complicated story, which is why you simplified it in the first place. It's just it gets messy, but
on the White Album there was an assistant engineer, tape op, T-boy if you will, but John Smith, who lives in Canada now, great guy, always well liked by everybody, and yet many people had not talked to him and not really dug into this world. So we were talking to him, and I said, tell us some stories. And he said, well, we were doing Blackbird, White Album, great. Paul had a book of Hiawatha, the Song of Hiawatha, of classic paperback he was reading. He took a pencil and started tapping along to it, and it sounded great. So I had to bring a mic in, and we mic'd up his book, and he played along to Blackbird. And that story is perfect. There's tapping on Blackbird. It sounds great. The story's complete. He remembers it. He was there. But there's a film of Paul recording Blackbird. Apple promotional film. At the bottom of the staircase, yellow shoes on, there's a mic on his foot, and he's playing Blackbird, and they're doing that. They mic'd the guitar and they mic'd his foot, thereby proving the story's not true. But could the story be true?
Hang on, which one?
Well, hold on.
Well,
is it the book or the foot?
No, He didn't
Both are true.
He didn't play Book on Blackbird, but then we realized you were also there on the same session for Mother Nature's Son, and there's a tapping sound on that, and he goes, "Oh yeah, it was Mother Nature's Son."
Right.
He'd just like forgotten which song it was because they recorded at the same time, and they're both acoustic Paul songs. Mm-hmm. But if you just took his original memory at face value, you know, you would have been wrong.
The scary part about this is, over time, we realized that humans in general, our group of humans, let's say it's 75, 85 people, contributed to the book in some small or large way. 50% right. 50% wrong. Right. But 50% wrong means he tapped the pencil on Hiawatha, very specific, with a microphone on Blackbird. See, technically that's wrong. Thrown out of court. Not true. But the story's true for some other reason. Mm-hmm. So there are stories to tell and different reasons. So you're technically wrong, but you mean something, but we can't use that as a proof. So be very suspicious about old stories. So gathering paperwork, gathering recording evidence, even comparing the story to, it doesn't make sense. It can't be true. Mm. But what did they mean? So our favorite part of that was the J37 is on the cover of our book. It's a 4-track Studer tape machine. And iconic because the Beatles made such great records, specifically Sgt. Pepper, on 4 tracks maximum at a time, bouncing and things, but still, Beatles made 4-track records for most of their career. And so that machine is so distinctive, and yet we asked people, how many did you have? Well, we had 4 because they were so expensive. There was basically one for each studio, 1, 2, 3, and then a remote that went to classical sessions or remote comedy shows. Okay, that's good. We talked to someone else, and he said, no. We had 7 because I was the person that went from room to room with a logbook, Studer 1 through 7, and I oiled them and I checked them and I set them up. I had my logbook. It's 7 Studers. No, because we couldn't afford that many. I had to write the check, and the check said we could only afford 4 Studers. And then somebody else said, no, there were 8 because we purchased 8 from the company, and I've seen the records of it. There were 8 of those. Oh, who is right? They're all right for different time periods.
That's the thing.
So in 64, they bought 4 machines. The new 4 tracks are out, 1 for each studio. The Beatles start bouncing. Hey, can we steal your tape machine from Studio 1's classical session? No. We need to buy more Studer machines because we keep wheeling them down the hall. They bought another set of 4, and one of them went to Hayes, the factory. And then 7 stayed at the studios, and then the logbook is correct, 7 Studer machines. Number 1 through 8, they have badges, they still exist. And so all stories are true in one period or for one reason, and all of those stories are also untrue if you look at it as
in other periods.
We only had 4. That's not true.
When you describe it like that, it's like it impresses me even more that you actually even managed to finish this book. It's like unbelievable the amount of detail that's gone into it, and like I would, I couldn't even begin to like wrap my mind around, like, if someone's telling me this and another person telling me this, but we've got records for this and this, and it's like it's crazy. So
that's why it took so long, and we created lots of spreadsheets, and we got crazy with it. But you have to organize it somehow that allows you to track all of those different things.
There are interesting things that we didn't put in the book that are rumors. We couldn't prove them either way. They're probably true, or maybe true for a day or something. I spoke to a guy that worked at the Selmer shop in London. Selmer was one of the stores down there, and he said they used to come in and rent Selmer bass amps, and they had a Lowry organ they got from us, which we know. He said they loved, we had an artificial Leslie, we had a spinning speaker. The Beatles loved playing through that, and they would come rent it. Mal Evans would come get them and bring them back. There's almost no visual evidence of it or written down, but in one picture of one studio session, you see a Selmer clavioline sitting on the floor of the studio here, and they did play clavioline on Baby a Rich Man at Olympic Studios. So if we hadn't seen that picture, we know there's a recording of it in another studio, but here's the Beatles with Selmer equipment, and then Paul has a Selmer guitar amp in just a couple pictures. Paul John plays through it too, and Sgt. Pepper. But where is that amp? Where did it come? Where did it go? So without a picture or two or one guy's story, maybe they had a lot of Selmer bass amp on the Beatles records. We just don't have.
You could almost write another book, Rumours of the Beatles.
Well, the
rumours. By the way, your power of recall is insane. Just now, even like talking to you, do you have people ring you up, or and call you up and go like, "Hey, I'm trying to record a piano like on Plastic Ono band. I'm getting something wrong," and do you get like people asking you for that kind of detail and things like that, or
not technical support?
Well, because you've got the book and the rumors and you've got all that context. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like because people are still. I mean, I know people who are trying to make records in the same way. So it's like,
there was a time early on, and also I remember there's a time when people knew we were working on the book and it hadn't quite come out. It was almost about to be out. So people knew we knew the information, but the book wasn't out yet. And I was getting hit up quite a bit then. Hey, I know the book's not out, but can you just tell me how to get this sound? And and there were a couple of times I'm like, okay, I'll give you a couple of little hints here. You got to get your tea towels, and just steering them in the right direction. But since the book came out, a lot of it's there. It's in the book, and people have been able to access it that way. So
tea towels is a reference to drums, right?
Tea towels are a reference to drums. Sorry, it's like
deadening drums. Drums on
in a certain period, it was very common, and most people were not doing it. They thought it sounded terrible on their drums. The Beatles thought it sounded fat and thick. And it does sound fat and thick. It's just a sound, but people have gotten away from it. Now it's a cool thing. For some people, not everybody, but
But it's sort of, if you're going for that sort of that wadded sound, it's of that period, you got to get your tea towels out on your snare and on your toms to get that dead sound.
I mean, I still stash of tea towels in my locker for sample sessions.
There you go.
I'm all for it.
But even in like a live setting, I mean, it's that classic thing, when there's like a house kit and it just sounds like pure it's so pots and pans, you're like dead in it.
That's right.
Yeah. Then again, there are so many stories about. Well, I mean, let's say somebody said, I want the paperback Writer guitar sound. I can tell you what amp and what guitar it was, and through your microphone, it's going to sound different. Through your preamp, that will change it again. Through a non-valve console onto not tape, you're already missing the boat, and then mixing it again through the same console onto another tape, cutting it onto vinyl. There's so many stages that are all important, but even if you duplicated it exactly, it's just a thing. They wouldn't care if it had a bit more top or a bit less bottom. I think they just got sounds and moved forward. So it's fun to play the game of, can I play Stairway to Heaven perfectly? Can I replicate Eddie Van Halen's guitar sound? Millions of people have done it. But in a way, I find that it's a little bit of a challenge. Can I build the Taj Mahal out of popsicle sticks? It's fun, but it's also kind of pointless. So I also felt that I wish we'd written a thing in the book said, this is to inspire you that the Beatles only had 8 mics and 2 compressors.
Okay.
This is to inspire you that they had only 4 tracks to work with. Please don't buy 8 mics that the Beatles had and 2 compressors that the Beatles had and try to be the Beatles. Learn from their experimentation, learn from their growth, learn from their constant push to be different, even to themselves. They didn't want to repeat Sgt. Pepper again.
Yeah, to what extent did you? Because I was wondering. I think I read an interview with you guys, and you talked about that when you were writing the book. You knew that there were many books about the Beatles, and there was about maybe their relationships to each other, or all that kind of stuff. But there hadn't been books about actually the music. Potentially the most important part. I wonder, when you were writing it, did you have a sense of like, what is the edges of the scope of this thing, or do we have a narrative feeling that we're laying on top of this, or like, okay, this is what we feel is important, or how do you kind of navigate that?
I mean, the way I approached it before we met, I just wanted I'd come to a point in my life and my experience in the studio where I was like, okay, now I know what tools do make the difference. Your choice of preamp, your choice of microphone, your choice of compressor, all that stuff, they really affect your signal chain and what sound you're going to get. So then I was like, so what were those that the Beatles were using? I want to know that. And there was no resource for that. You had whispers of things on the internet, most of which were wrong or like partially right. But I had a checklist of things that I wanted to know. I wanted to know what tools they had. And so I started out just trying to answer that checklist. And Brion was doing the same thing, although you were also looking into instruments and stuff at that point and all different things. But our main thing was like, what was the inventory of Abbey Road to an extent? Like, what tools did they have on hand, and how was it being used, and how do we stitch that together? How do we package that in a way that's accessible for people, and it's not just like reading a catalog of parts catalog. So there was that challenge of like organizing it in a way that was accessible to people and interesting still.
And you're telling a story through this.
The second half of the book, which we called the production section, was walking people year by year. Okay, they started out in this year using these tools, and then as they went through the year, this started coming and this started coming in. So there's a chronological narrative that goes through. But the first part of the book is just like, here's all their microphones, and here's the background on the microphones. Here's every tape machine, and here's the background on the tape machine. So
it's strange because I'm remembering now, our goal was a chapter on the speakers, a chapter on the tape recorders, a chapter on the outboard gear, one on the studios, one on the people. And we did that, and the book was written. It was done. And then I said to Kevin, it doesn't work. Like, I can't remember what speaker was in 67 when I'm looking at the tape recorder chapter 120 pages later. There's no way to understand it. We're the only two people that understand this arc because we have all this data flowing through our heads. We need to find some way to combine it together to make a chronological flow using the characters we've introduced. What's a Red 37? What's a J37? And let's combine them together somehow. How can we make that work? Kevin, I have an idea. So Kevin largely created the second half of the book using timelines and dates. And I was contributing lists of instruments and things. I'd been studying that for years to get details right. And then that is the part. You could never read it if you hadn't read the first part of the book. And the first part of the book, 2/3 of it, if you will, is just introducing the whole world to these characters that no one knew about. When we started, no one but a few people knew what that mixing board was. We thought the Beatles probably had one mixing board. It looked like the same one in all the pictures I had. And I didn't know who made it or what it was. And so somewhere at home I have a notebook, and it says, Beatles book. What mixing board did they use? What speaker did they use? What microphones did they use? And the question, what mixing board did they use, is 150 pages by the time we're done with it. All the different versions of the boards and the features of and the patchings and things. Craziness. But who knew getting into it that it would go that far? But the concept was that 98% of it was unknown to us and everybody. And even the day the book was about to come out, if you looked on the web, the Beatles used a Red 37 mixing board because one person had seen Lenny Kravitz's board and taken pictures and documented it. Lenny Kravitz had bought a former Beatles mixing board from the first 2 years, and it had a name on it, Red 37. Okay, so that's the Beatles board. It actually doesn't even look like the one in Sgt. Pepper. It looks similar, but nobody was comparing the number of knobs and the placements. So the day before our book came out, there was no mention of Red 51, the main Beatles board, anywhere in the world. No mention of the TG desk anywhere in the world.
I mean, that Red 37 that Lenny Kravitz had at one point, that was actually from Studio One, right?
That's right,
So that was used to record orchestral. It wasn't even used to record
They did
very little right? Beatles was recorded on that desk, But the main thing is, when we started, we had no idea how much was unknown. We had a very basic shopping list, and we satisfied that pretty quickly. And every time you'd answer one of those questions, there were all these new questions and all these new trails to go down. So when we started, we were very unaware of how much there was yet to be discovered.
You're starting from nothing.
And it just like kept branching out, and we kept finding more and more and more. And we still turn up. That's this new edition that we're working on. We've added, it's been almost 20 years since the book came out. This new edition is going to be basically the 20th anniversary edition of the book. And we've added so much stuff because in 20 years, you can imagine, we still continued to find stuff.
Continue to find out.
It keeps coming in. We've added so much to the book that we've had to split it into 2 volumes.
Oh, wow.
So it's not just that one book is a pretty hefty book, and if you just keep adding to that, it's going to become it's already unwieldy, but like
it'll break people's coffee tables.
Yeah, you can't
go straight through.
You can't. People are already like, if I read it on my lap in bed, my legs go to sleep. You know, there's like we can't be adding to it. So yeah, it's like 2 volumes now.
So the advice for people out there is, not quite a decade ago, but after 10 years of selling Recording the Beatles, and it was doing fine, we decided to stop because we wanted to make it better. And then at the time, we'd been approached to do this George Martin book, which is quite an honor and very important to us to be involved in that at all. And it was a lot of work, and we said we can't do both. We're going to focus on the George Martin book right now. It's been given to us as a major project, you know, a dream come true in some ways, even though we'd never imagined it could have existed. And we refuse to do anything else but, although it's taking such a long time, and we have lives, you know, we have things to do. But so we'll encourage anybody not to spend enormous amounts of money on the old book, because at some point they'll be flooding the market with them. Nobody will want it when a double-size version with much better pictures and more information that we've learned in 20 years is going to come out.
Yeah.
And that'll be much
easier to write.
That's very honest
of you to say. Most people wouldn't say that.
Well, we're not making the money. I wish we could.
Get on the resale. But,
but in a way, people have just this week said to me, why don't you just do another run of 1,000 books for the people out there? And he said, well, because we're busy with this other project, it's going to need our time and our money to make it a real thing. And also, I would be angry if I paid X amount for a book and then a double-sized better book comes out.
Yeah, it's just not cool to do to people. Like,
we're pretty sure we can do a fast, well, not fast, you know, about a year after we finish this George Martin book, we will have added to Recording the Beatles, which we've basically been gathering that information for 20 years.
We've been working on it for a while.
This is our home territory.
Yeah.
So we can do that book pretty easily.
Yeah. The people who say to you, just put it out, like, just put out 1,000 copies, they're not the kind of people who'd write the book you wrote, by the way. You know, I don't think they understand. You know,
they don't have anywhere near as much detail.
They're not.
You know how much that costs just to print 1,000 and then store them and ship them. I mean, they might sell, but and it's still good information. But we really just feel like we're focused, and there's enough of them out there, and it sold for 10 years. We had it out. Still, people didn't always know about it, but we really think if you want that book, you will love the next version of it.
We're excited about that.
Are you conscious of like it's a big word, but like the legacy of the book? Because actually, when lots of these things that, because you know, I'd use plugins that were, now we know these are like part of what the Beatles used, but like you're saying, before a certain point in time, relatively recently, people didn't know that. So you conscious of like, there is like a kind of a before and after this was all opened up? Because as you say, there was a much simpler, I mean, there's books out there, you know, Jeff Emmerich's book and stuff like that, but they're very broad strokes.
Yeah.
So you conscious of like things like, no, they were heavily modified Altec compressors and, you know, like things like that where, you know, there's a time before we knew, and there's a time after. You know.
Yeah. That's true. I mean,
I guess all people knew was that there was a certain amount of gear made in the factories over in Hayes,
that's
right?
It.
And some of it went to other EMI studios around the world.
Yeah.
You know, South America or Australia, etc. And then other bits specifically only went to Abbey Road, right?
Yeah.
Which was even rarer, but. From what I gather, there were some people around the world who somehow stumbled across this gear, like TG desks or whatever, or bits of TG desks, and started taking them apart and experimenting with them. And I mean, it was like changing money for like crazy amounts of. It was changing hands for crazy amounts of money, as it were. I imagine back then.
And there were a lot of people who, this was made by EMI. Oh, that was the studio the Beatles recorded. Oh, this was used by the Beatles. No. You know, there was a lot of that stuff. This could have been used by the Beatles. And I think part of our responsibility in making the book was to kind of set the record straight about a lot of stuff. You think this was the thing. It's not. But this is. You know, you don't know about this. So there was a lot of just getting to the bottom of the truth and setting the record straight was very important.
It's not even thinking about legacy or importance or something, but I remember when there was a microphone called D19C that's in every Beatles drum picture ever taken almost, and they were not valuable. They were common, not easily found, but you could find them, and most people didn't want them, even though you can clearly see that's what it is in the pictures. When our book came out and explained what it is and how much it was used and how well it was used, they exploded, and everybody's like, oh, that's a great drum mic, and people are definitely using it as one of their, if not preferred, drum microphone. And so it's nice to see that kind of thing happen, but you see the prices go crazy. I wish I'd bought dozens of them. But then I mean, and things like that, Altec and the spin-off products of those things, and people experimenting with that stuff, giving it time of day and interest, where it was a dead branch in the water. It really was not interesting, even though Pink Floyd had it in their pictures too, and other people. Sure, it just didn't generate anything. But everybody knew the Fairchild because that was the Beatles thing. That's the Beatles compressor. What are those two things sitting on top? Oh, I don't know, but I'll pay you $15,000 for a Fairchild. But those, I don't even know what they are.
It's one thing being able to afford to buy that sort of gear on the second-hand market, right? But it's another thing to actually, know how to look after it and keep it working. And I mean, D19s, I wouldn't recommend anyone buys a D19. I mean,
they're so fragile.
The most difficult mic in the world to fix.
I've
seen Lester tear his hair out.
I was going to say, unless you've got Lester living with you.
And even then,
of all the microphones in the world to reissue, they're not expensive to make. They should figure it out.
They really should.
Done it.
Okay, good.
Have
okay,
they?
good.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like a D19.
Right. Okay.
I imagine when you open it up inside, it's not. But
but I mean, it could be done. There are various reissues of things that are done well and other ones that are decent. But of all the things, rather than a Behringer D19, but to do a AKG official.
You're not far off.
Yeah, but I mean, an AKG official model with maybe they might have the plans in the factory. Yeah. Could be.
Yeah. Brilliant. Just conscious of the time, I did want to ask you guys one last question. You might not want to answer it, but talking about constraints and you guys both being so passionate about music equipment, I'd love to know if you guys could only use, both of you, one microphone, one EQ and one compressor for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I know the microphone, I'd say, and it's the red, the
Chandler Red microphone.
The Chandler Red microphone, yeah. It's my favorite microphone. I think it's fantastic. Of it, It sounds like, and I've told you this before, it sounds to me...
Did you bribe him?
Yeah, he didn't. Brian's heard me talk
Drinks
about too
from
much.
me in the bar afterwards, man.
Microphones afterwards.
Yeah. To me, it sounds like, before I would see, those classic vintage valve microphones and photos and stuff, and I had never touched one or seen one in person, but I imagined what they sounded like. I bet it sounds like this, and I'd imagine it in my brain. And of course, when I finally got my hands on classic vintage microphones, which aren't always maintained, they're very old, they didn't sound like what I thought they'd sound like, but that mic sounds like what I thought those mics would sound like. It's fantastic. I love it.
We're really proud of it. It's
you should be.
Sounding mic. Speaking of how vintage mics should sound, I mean, that session we first met each other on, the John Brion session, do you remember?
Absolutely. I know where you're going.
I think it was like day one, the setup day. Yes. John Brion said to me, he said, can you get all the valve mics out, please, and set them all up in the And it was one of those sort of things I was like, come again? Want to do what?
And we talked about it today, having seen all the power supplies, 36 of them, from U47s lined up on the floor.
Yeah,
I learned so much because I was very young then. I'd only been here about a year, and I didn't realise. But what he was looking for was, so he had all the valve mics lined up, all the C12s, all the 47s, all the 67s, and he was walking down each one and speaking into each one with a pair of headphones and just listening for the sound characteristics.
Oh, nice.
And what I learnt then, which obviously I know now, but every single serial number sounds different.
Yeah.
Whether the capsule's been knocked or valve's been replaced or whatever it is. Small little things here and there. And for a while I had this, because I had to note all this down, and then he chose his favourite serial numbers, and those are the ones that were used on the session. So it took a long time to do it, but I had this book, I've still got it somewhere, and obviously it probably isn't relevant anymore because the valves have changed again, etc., etc. But for a while I had this kind of handbook of the best serial numbers in Abbey Road, and I would refer to it.
You can sell that. Yeah. I mean, it's some of that stuff's ended up. I mean, it's the good and the bad side of the internet. But I had that thing in Nashville, an amazing secondhand guitar shop, and the one, and it was just ridiculous, and one of the few places where you're allowed to play, in 1952 and Les Paul and stuff like that. And they had this thing, because I'd gone down the rabbit hole of Fender Tweed amps and 5E3s and stuff like that, but then I got wind that it's serial numbers and stuff like that. And then they had two that were basically exactly the same, and then one of them was like, oh, this $4,000. I got my credit card, you know, and then there's another one and it was like $30,000. I was like, oh, okay, this is one of the good ones.
Right.
Yeah.
That was in it. We literally had a forest of microphones set up in
I've got pictures somewhere. Yeah.
It's mind blowing. Yeah, that was incredible.
Mic pre and EQ.
Well, for both of those, one I love is I have two of the modules from a Sound Techniques console that was built in 67 or 68. 67. And it was, Sound Techniques was a British, board manufacturer. They made the consoles that were used at Trident Studios, the original ones. That's the board like the Beatles were recording Hey Jude through and all that stuff. But there were some boards made for a couple of the LA studios, and I have two of the modules from that, which are just rarer than hen's teeth, and they sound incredible. They're just amazing for the preamp and the EQ units. If you just give me one of those strips and that EMI microphone, I mean, pretty good.
We should do a plug-in.
We should.
Let's do it. Someone owns that company, and you have to negotiate with them. And then EQ.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the more on EQ there is great.
Microphone, I have a weird answer because I don't have experience with great microphones. I've used U47s and things. Telefunken 251 is pretty exceptional on most things. But again, to use them on whatever, oddly enough, my choice is just one I love and I use all the time, and it's a PV dynamic microphone. And I know the number of it, but I won't tell anybody because I don't.
You work for fools.
30 years, I've searched the internet. There's no mention of it. No one has one in their stockpile. There's none for sale. I use it on every guitar track, snare drums, all kinds of things. I can't find another. It's from the 80s. AMR was actually the company they made where they hid the PV name, but they called it AMR for recording. And they made a lot of AMR microphones. I bought them all, hoping for another magic one. But I cannot make a bad sound through it, and it makes everything sound like a record. It's not really hi-fi, but it's not as boxy as an SM57 or something that people know. And I just used it on acoustic guitars. I just did it on electric. So it's a weird choice. And yet I don't really need another one. I've got one, and I've used it for years. So that's a strange choice. But the same answer for mic pre's and EQ. You talked about legacy. That's one of my favorite parts of doing our book. The Beatles went to record at Trident Studios when they left Abbey Road. Trident was hipper and newer, and they'd bought these desks from the company called Sound Techniques, which was unknown to everybody on the planet. What's a Sound Techniques? It's not a Neve, it's not an API, it's not anything. And so I kept searching for what that was. And one point in time in Los Angeles at the music store, Sound Techniques channels came in from Elektra Studios, which used to be in Hollywood. Elektra's where the Doors recorded and Stooges and a bunch of people. Great records. What are these? What do they sound like? That's that company, Sound Techniques. I don't know. Finally, I couldn't even plug them in. We didn't know how to wire them up. I was kind of a kid. And then years later, I found this guy that had started the company. So we visited him. I went to his house in London. We had dinner, and I said, Sound Techniques is the Bowie records. Sound Techniques is early Elton John. Sound Techniques is the Beatles. It's Walk on the Wild Side. It's tons of amazing records. And whenever I mix things, let's say I'm at Warner Brothers or somewhere, they send me a tape from Sound Techniques, from Elektra, from Sunset Sound. Those all had, maybe there were 6 of their boards in the world, let's say. 6 of these boards made. Every one of those tapes sounds killer. Snare drums, vocals, and they don't sound natural. So it's not like a Telefunken or something very clean, but it sounded great. These are the sounds of Hunky Dory, the sounds of Walk on the Wild Side, which is an amazing sounding record, or Elton John stuff.
Nick
Drake as well. Oh my God, Jethro Tull, Deep Purple, all these great vintage records, and they have a sound to them. Fairport Convention. And so I found this guy, we had dinner, I said, you need to make Sound Techniques again. He said, no one cares but you and Liam Watson at Toe Rag. Oh, he's a friend of mine. And he goes, you're the only people in the world that know what these things are. We failed kind of as a company. We made it what we did for a while. We tried to make other boards. They didn't go far. Okay. But then we made a website, and I helped his son add tons of details to the records made with Sound Techniques. And you start to see these #1 records. Queen! With Sound Techniques, but no one has one. And those came through my hands years ago. Suddenly people started trying to find them and find him. And he said, I think we're going to make them again. we're going to make some modules, make a desk. And I said, no, we don't use desks anymore. We use preamps. And we use, oh, okay. So I actually found 2 of the original channels, bought them broken, not working, paid enormous sums. And then I got them repaired, and the repairman was literally delivering saying, I hope you like these. And I was like, why? He said, they don't sound normal. They sound kind of different. And I went home and plugged in. Fantastic. Incredible. And not just good, my favorite kit. And then they brought these reissues out. They sounded 90% as good. So better than almost anything I knew, better than almost anything I'd heard, but not as good as the original. And then our friend Danny White in America bought the company from the older man, Jeff Frost, who was trying to restart the company. Danny bought it and spent over a year trying to duplicate the transformers and got it exactly right. I think the new ones are absolutely as good, maybe a notch better than the old one, but I kind of use the old one more often, and it is from 1967. Yeah. The Rolling Stones did Gimme Shelter on that console, things like that. So Sound Techniques is now known, and the people that have tried it are like, oh my God, it sounds good. But it's actually a company that pretty much failed. They made great records all over the world, but we really got it started again. So it's one of my proudest things. Nice. And it is amazing. Yeah, it's my go-to in the studio. Plug into it, I'm happy. Sounds great.
Same.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's about all we got time for today, but thank you both so much for coming on. I mean,
great to be here.
It's been brilliant chatting to you both.
Good.
Yeah. And you guys at home, you've been watching and listening to the Audiomovers podcast, and we will catch you guys next time.